Hello, everybody. We have a way of crowding rooms. What's that? Yeah, well, how do you guys like the setup?
They're not sure yet.
Not too shabby, eh? I think we'll be able to see each other a little bit better when we do, well, except for you guys probably can't see the people over here.
We never can.
I was just thinking about when we do worship night or whatever,
Oh,
how to
that would be
arrange.
interesting.
Yeah. Move these tables here and we'll just make rows of chairs back all the way. Y'all seen this room? This room's pretty awesome. It's like going back to school. It's 2 rows of desks. I like it. Check it out. Check it out. Nice little classroom. They're very intimate. Well, sorry for you older kids. You have to listen to me again. Tough crowd. Emmanuel, a few weeks ago, had asked me to do a part 2 of my testimony. I'm still trying to figure out what that is. But I'm going to share with you guys a little bit today. I think probably, last time I shared, it was more of it was definitely a spiritual journey, but more of my personal life journey and the way that I was raised, the way that I perceived things, and kind of how God interrupted that and really began to change my heart and mind.
Sorry, are we recording?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, Noah's got recording up here. I think maybe I'll share starting from just prior to our move out of Texas, just some of the ways that God did things. Testimonies like this from any one of us adults and our experience in the Lord are, you don't necessarily ever have to imagine that God is going to do things with you in the exact way that he did things with someone else. But we do learn some of the character attributes of God through others. That's not so dissimilar to the value of observing characters in the scriptures. I know growing up for me, the Bible was very much just kind of a general knowledge of everything, and yeah, you knew all the stories, but very rarely do you really take an intimate look into someone's life, and maybe even see things through their eyes. That's just, unfortunately, not really the way that the Bible is taught, and it's also not the way that it's taught to be taught. And what I mean by that is even when I went to Bible college, that's not really how the scriptures were approached. The scriptures are approached very systematically based on the doctrines and proposed agendas or understandings of God's purposes, but not necessarily from God's point of view. So there's a lot of presumption there. But I'll say, testimonies of people's experiences with God, I've heard a lot of testimonies of people's experiences, and sometimes when you hear of people's spiritual experiences, you feel really, it's very possible that you feel quite distanced from their experience because you haven't experienced it, right? And sometimes you even think that people are, think that they're something, so prideful, and because they've had an experience that you haven't, and so then you think that they think that they're special because of the experience that they have. So all of that is just a further way of divisiveness and comparison that is not really helpful to Christian life and fellowship with the Spirit or with one another. We see a lot of that same, whether it be jealousy, or, pride on the other side of, the invalidation of people's experiences with God, because we haven't had them ourselves. It's not something familiar to us. And, but there are things that are worth trying that other people tried. One of those for me was I really wanted to hear God speak. That is not something that I think that any believer, any son in God's house, at whatever stage or level of maturity, should ever stop seeking, is to hear the Lord. I know that we actually read part of this passage just in the Bible study this morning in John, when it was a very convicting time in my life where I was actually, I think Emmanuel shared that recently at his Bible study on Wednesday nights, at how at one point the Lord told him to start in the Gospel of John. That was how his first place he was supposed to approach the Scriptures. And that myself and several other sources, I think 7 other sources, had come around when the Lord told him to start in the Gospel of John. Then all these other people were starting Bible studies and fellowships related to the Gospel of John. I remember going through that Bible study and teaching it myself. I remember coming to the point in John chapters 5 through 7 where Jesus basically has some... he talks about his testimony, his communication with the Father, his relationship with the Father. And that became a huge offense to those who were hearing it. And because they were assuming their own relationship with the Father based on human knowledge rather than on actual personal experience with God. So experiences are not... that they're not the forte of the Christian life, but they do have they have a lot of impact on the development of our relationship with the Lord. But that particular passage that was so convicting to me was in John 5 through 7, and specifically where Jesus says, I only do what I see the Father doing, and I only say what I hear the Father saying. And so when I really began to think about that, I thought, oh man, do I really see what God is doing? Or am I making it up out of what I read in the Scriptures? It was very different to me. And when I was growing up in the 80s, and I think it was not until the 90s, there was a trend in Christianity that kind of washed over the whole nation, maybe even the whole world. It was called the WWJD trend. What is that, Hannah?
I think it stands for What Would Jesus Do?
Yeah, what would Jesus do? And so, there were bracelets and necklaces and all these things that you would wear, because whatever situation you were in, whoever you were with, whatever's happening, you should ask yourself, what would Jesus do? And what came of that is that people would scour the Scriptures and look for all the things that Jesus did during his life and ministry on the earth. And they would say, oh, well, this is a similar situation, and Jesus said this, and Jesus did this, so I should say that, and I should do that. And oh, I've got somebody coming against me. Well, I'm going to quote a Scripture and say, well, turn the other cheek, because Jesus said to do that. Or Jesus went through this situation and he did that, so I'm going to do that. Interestingly, nobody really paid attention to what Jesus actually did. Or what he really said. Because what he said is not just what was recorded in the Gospels. What he said is what he heard the Father saying. So what Jesus did is he waited upon the Father. He heard the Father. He obeyed the Father. That's what Jesus did. So if we want to do what Jesus did, we don't copy his stuff. We go to the Father. And that's the thing that Jesus even conveyed to his disciples when he said that he was leaving them, but he would never forsake them. the Spirit would be with him even to the end of the age. He said, I go to my Father and your Father. He said, you will no longer ask something in my name because you can speak directly to the Father. When you do ask in my name, it's for the same purpose. And then he said, you're not going to ask me to do it. Because you yourself can talk to the Father. So my point in sharing that is that I came to this place where I thought, oh man, I know a lot of, and that's basically what God had told me. So there was a different unpacking of God saying to me, you know a lot about me, but you don't know who I am. Well, there's a lot about God in that book. And that's the big forte of Christianity, is that book. And that book is a wonderful, God-given, inspired, true, absolutely true resource for us. In many ways, it does provide a wonderful standard and foundation for us in Christianity. But that book is not a person. That book speaks of a person. And specifically what it speaks of that person is that person can be known. You can speak with, you can fellowship with this person. That's the testimony of every single person in that book. Yet somehow Christianity today says all you need is the book. I would submit that the book without the person is worthless. Sorry if that's an offense to whoever clings to the Bible in an unhealthy manner. That doesn't undermine the Scriptures. But unfortunately, we put the Scriptures in a place that undermines God. The person of God. And that's not a new phenomenon. That is something that has happened for millennia. Many, many, many generations of God's people have put the Scriptures above God. And even tried to use them to control God, to imagine or tell one another or God himself what he can and can't do. And God will not be bound by man's ignorance and folly and foolishness along that line. When I came to that personal realization, what I realized was, oh, I probably shouldn't talk a whole lot. Because I don't hear God. How can I say what he's saying if I don't hear him saying it? Again, Christianity says, well, you can read it so you can say it. That's God's word so you can say it. Is that what Jesus did? No, it's not. Did Jesus make reference to the Scriptures? He absolutely did. And I know that those will say, well, that's because he was the Son of God. Well, God wants to have sons, and he was the first among many. So his life was a pattern. And he was giving over, imparting that pattern to his own disciples. Now you can go to the Father. Now you can hear the Father. Now whatever you loose is loose. Now whatever you bind is bound. That's the authority that God gives his sons. But not to any just because they are. But because they have come to a place of maturity and responsibility in his house. Back to my testimony, that I entered into a place of some silence. I think Emmanuel says that I didn't speak for almost a year. I don't remember that direct amount of time, but I do remember being pretty much silenced. And in that time, I've really wrestled a lot with hearing from God. I remember one evening sitting out in the front of my porch, and I remember hearing some of other people's experiences with hearing God, our brother Emmanuel being one of those. And I remember praying for a couple of hours outside, just sitting outside, deep into the night, listening to God, for God, in any possible way. Through the gentle breeze, the rustling of a leaf. I was exasperated, pleading with God to speak. And I didn't hear anything. I went back into the house and went to bed, and I was pretty dejected and, felt like I don't know what to do. Then God began to speak to me in some very unconventional ways. There were mostly in the inner man a stirring up of and the bringing forth of a voice that I had not heard and wasn't sure was God or not. So, I began to test that, and that testing was primarily the way that God was dealing with my life circumstantially through many things. And then, sometimes the Lord would give me, I would wake up in the middle of the night and have a scripture on my mind just out of nowhere. And I would look at that, and the Lord would speak through that. That's not always the way it happened. Sometimes it happened in very strange ways. I remember because I had an internal conversation in my heart and mind with God that had been going on for many years, even as a young person, but not really with an expectation until this point to actually hear back from God in a certain way. Because most of my communication with God was about my personal circumstance and desires, and not necessarily in relation to what His heart and His purpose was. But that was now changing. And with that change came a change in my inner man. I began to have visions and dreams. I didn't know how to explain that. I had never had those things happen before. I honestly judged against those who did have those types of experiences because I didn't believe that they were real. I didn't believe that those things were possible any longer. I was in the same upbringing of God only speaking through the scriptures. So when those things began to happen in my life, it was very unsettling, mainly because God was undoing a lot in my life. So my soul, my inner man, my soul had a lot of trouble with the things that God was showing me. A lot of times dreams can be that way. That the realm of dreams is very, very influenced by the soul. And so dreams are not always the best way to understand the will of God, because they can be very much distorted by the condition or temperament of our soul. Dreams really need discernment and interpretation. Visions many times need interpretation, but they come from a different place. They're less influenced by the soul, so there's a greater level of purity with visions. They're more direct, and so it's a different kind of discernment with visions, and a different context as well. Dreams are very personal. Visions I have understood to have personal application, but in a more specific way to spiritual, a revealing of something spiritually, or an exposure of something, or a greater application to the body. So some of the early dreams that I had were very unsettling because God was going to unsettle my life, and He was showing me that, and my soul's response to those things was very troubled. Most of those dreams, when I woke up from dreams like that, when I woke up, I was unimaginably relieved that what I had just experienced was only a dream and not reality. I can remember on more than one occasion literally waking up and saying, "Thank you, God, that wasn't real." And then I went through it later in life. God was preparing my heart. But see, I'm giving you a little bit of context for dreams because they don't necessarily play your future out. God can use those things as a preparation for certain comings in your life. One of the first visions that I had was I saw a huge stone structure building. I was standing on one corner of it, or in the vision I could see one corner of it. And I was looking at it, and then this hand from the heavens held out a plumb line. You guys know what a plumb line is. Looks like kind of a thick arrowhead or triangle, but it's round all the way around. Doesn't have to be, but the point is that when it makes a straight line when you hold it with a string, because of the way that gravity works. It will the hanging of that line is called plumb, which means it's perfectly straight up and down. That's the way a plumb works. So you can use a plumb even in your hand. You can just hold it out. I could get a plumb, and I could screw a nail in to the corner right here and have it come straight out. And if I hung that plumb line on it, you would be able to see whether this wall may look straight to you. But if I hung the plumb line out, you would be able to make an exact measurement of how straight this wall is from the top to the bottom. That's what a plumb line does. So in this vision, when the plumb line came near this wall, then I was able to see that some of the stones were all out of place. Some were further in, some were further out. That wasn't all straight and aligned. And so I knew, it was like the Lord was speaking to me in interpreting this vision as I was seeing it. And when that plumb line was held out, I knew, oh man, this has to change. And not only that, when this change comes, it's going to be pretty disturbing. And this is the condition of the church as it is right now. That was 20 years ago or more that I had that vision. I shared it with a few people. Everyone was like, yeah, whatever, because they were very much of the same understanding that I had been previously. What was interesting is I had never had a vision before, and I knew it was from God, and then he was also kind of downloading to me what was going on with that, and that is something that the Lord was using also to look ahead. So many unconventional ways that God began to draw me near to his thinking, to his ways. So that vision, that's not about my life even. That's not about something, a circumstance that I want an answer for. Is this going to happen in my life? Is this bad thing going to go away? Is this good thing going to come? Is this person going to do what I hope? Or whatever that circumstance may be. I'm in this hard circumstance. Is it going to change? I need something. Is that going to be provided? That's a very different perspective of life. So the Lord, when he begins to open you up to see what he sees, many times he draws you in. When you read the scriptures again, notice that. Notice that when those like Isaiah or Daniel or John in Revelation are taken to spiritual places where they can see with spiritual eyes, and God wants to show them something, and they look at it and they're like, what am I looking at? And many times God sends a messenger to them, and that messenger comes and says, what do you see? And he's like, well, I see this. And then the messenger says, what does that mean? And he's like, I don't know. You know. Tell me what it means. See, God is taking us into places to see things that we don't typically look at, that we don't understand, not only in the spiritual realm, but based on what his purpose and work are. The reason I'm sharing you this, I'm not just sharing a spiritual principle with you. I'm telling you, God began to do that in me. My life, our lives, very much until God begins to communicate with us in that way, are very narrow. We're very narrow-minded. We don't think really outside our little circle of relationships and circumstances and our own needs and desires. You guys hearing that? You probably don't very often look outside your own context of life, your own lifespan, the relationships of people that you are in with right now. So when the Lord was giving me dreams and he was showing me that the relationships that I held very close to me were going to change, man, my life really started to get disturbed. When I was working in ministry with my father and the Lord began to give me dreams that clearly indicated that I would not stay in that type of relationship with my father in ministry, my whole life was upended. because I couldn't see my life outside of what I had already imagined it to be. Be prepared for God to undo certain things in your life when you ask Him to speak to you. He will do that. Don't be afraid of it. I mean, I was afraid of those things. They seemed terrible to me. The first dream, one of the dreams that I had early on, I'm not going to describe the dream, but it very, very much detailed my departure from the ministry in Austin. And when I woke up again, I was like, oh God, so thankful for this job that I have. Because see, I'm still in that. But God was working in my inner man to undo that. Later on, in that same tenor of communication from the Lord was showing other people the same thing through prophetic utterance and vision. And then that brought a new level of unsettlement in my life spiritually. Because I was starting to realize that something was, here's the thing, guys. I could have stayed in that, but I also could not deny, I didn't want to deny what I knew was God, even though I didn't like or understand very well what was happening. And some of those people that were very near to me, pretty much, very much stated their disagreement. In fact, there was a moment where I was so drawn to the Lord in this way. Because as fearful as it was, I knew it was God, and I just couldn't let it go. And that was beginning to, partially because of my excitement about God speaking, then I couldn't help myself, telling people how God was speaking to me, specifically people really near to me. Rachel at that point she had not heard from God in that way. We had been married about 7 years, and wonderful marriage. We had all of our kids, young family, and there was no problem with our marriage. That wasn't an issue, but she was not on the same page, seeing what I was seeing, hearing what I was hearing, or even experiencing God in that way at all. And it came to a point where those around me, Rachel did not initiate this, but others did, actually came to my home and said to me, "You are off course. You are not hearing from God. And the way that you're making decisions in life and the things that you say that you're hearing from God are going to even potentially cause you to lose your job, and because we're not going to have that kind of stuff around here. You're wrong. And you need to admit that you're wrong and make it right. Get back on track." And I remember that I really had a hard time with that. Because there's the people that were very near to me, that I love very much. And actually Rachel was there during that time. And not out of any enmity or despondency on her part, or even ugliness toward me, but just out of a plain, candid truth, she said, "I kind of understand what they're saying because I don't know what's going on with you either." Which, for those people, was a justification of what they had said. And so I felt like everything that was dear to me in life had just been compromised. That I was going to lose it. That was actually not long, only a couple, maybe, I don't know, was that a year after the little girl in Arkansas prophesied over my life? And that was crazy stuff. I had people coming to me prophesying, people your age coming to me, prophesying my life, come to me, corner me in the middle of a road and say, "God told me to come and say something to you." And in myself, I'm thinking, okay, little girl. And then I went to the people that I trusted, and they were like, "Oh yeah, that doesn't, whatever." But man, it was like a sharp sword inside of me. I couldn't let it go. What she said was, "You're going to face the trials of Job." Well, anybody want to hear that? I didn't know what it meant. I went to the closest spiritual advisor that I had, and all he said was, "Oh, that's bad." And now in this moment, I sat in my own living room in my own home with the people closest to me in life. And they said, we don't want any part of what's going on with you spiritually. And my own wife said, I don't understand it. So I kind of get where they're coming from. And it just welled up inside me. I said, I don't know how to respond to you. All that I know is that I am compelled by Christ to continue. I cannot turn my back on Christ. I can't do it. Their sentiment was, well, this isn't Jesus. So, you should. But I knew from whom I had heard. So they left in anger because I would not relent. And I felt that even my own wife had betrayed me in a sense. I wasn't bitter against her. I was just didn't know what to do. And I went back to a bedroom in our home and I just wept harder than maybe I've ever wept. Before God. Felt like I had nothing in life. I cried out to God. And the Lord spoke to me. Again. In that moment. Use my name. And he said, Tim, I want you to bear this cross. It was really, you would think that would be hard to hear. I don't want to, from the sentiment of I don't want to go through things. I don't want to experience things. But peace came over my heart almost instantly. You know why? Because it was my Father. I didn't like what I was hearing, but I wasn't even thinking about what I didn't like. All that I cared about was, wow, he's talking to me. That makes everything okay. And he said, Tim, I want you to bear this cross. Because if you don't bear this one, you won't be able to bear the next one. That sound like fun to you? Fun didn't have anything to do with it. All I knew is God had spoken. He continued on. About 10 minutes later, as I lay there, Rachel came in to check on me. I'm sure it was very odd because I was kind of inconsolable at that moment. And she was gentle. And then after she left the room, the Lord spoke again. And he said, I'm going to restore your wife to you. I'm going to restore your family to you. And I don't think it was not more than a week or so that things began to change. I don't know what happened in Rachel's life at that moment. Because there was still a lot of confusion. Not rejection, but confusion on her part. But I think what was inspired in her was a little bit of curiosity. Because it was within a few days that she came back to me. I was still recovering from a surgery. And I won't go through her experience there, but what she communicated with me was this. She said, babe, I don't know what you're going through. I don't understand it. But she said, all I do know is that you said that you are following Jesus. And I want to follow Jesus too. So I'm with you, even though I don't understand. And after 7 years of marriage, something pretty dramatically changed in our life at that point, in our walk together. I didn't rise up as a husband and man and head of my household and put my fist on the table and tell Rachel, you have to do these things because I'm the father, I'm the head. See, what she had done in herself, and this goes for any person, is something in her shifted and she wanted to know too. And she asked me at that point, maybe a couple days later, she said, if you say you're hearing from God, I want to hear from God. And that put me on the spot a little bit because I didn't know how to tell her to hear from God. So I just said, well, then you're going to have to ask God to speak to you. And I would recommend that to any of you. If you want to hear from God, ask God to speak. And don't stop until He does. One day I came home from work. And she was really excited. And she said, I think God spoke to me today. And I thought, well, what'd He say? And she said, well, I was doing, I don't know, you were standing at the kitchen counter or something like that, and something happened, and God said, get ready. And she said, what do you think that means? And I said, I don't know. But I'm glad you heard from God. And then so many other things started to happen in life. My children started to have dreams. And they were all in line with what God was moving and shifting in this transition of my life and for our family. Which wasn't just about moves and places and things. It was about bringing us to a place of a greater engagement in God's work. And God was doing it so gently. So gently. In fact, when that time came, Noah had a vision or a dream about moving to the desert, following Jesus. And that was when God had already brought to mind a dream that I had had several years before about leaving my job and moving to California in a poor area, which is where we lived. None of that made any sense to me until it happened. And then I was like, how could he possibly know this? Because I haven't talked to him about it. I remember later on still hoping and desiring for confirmation. Sorry, okay. It from the Lord, like, are we really supposed to do this? Because I had nowhere to go. I had no job to go to. We knew no one. We had no idea what was going on. I'll tell you some crazy things that happened. I actually have pictures of some of this. I was talking on the phone. I can't remember to who. I think it may have been Emmanuel, because he had already moved to California. And I was down at Mission Possible, and have you ever played with an Etch-a-Sketch? I had an Etch-a-Sketch, and I was talking on the phone and like literally just twisting the dials. And I looked down, and there was almost a perfect picture of the state of California on it. And I was like, what? I was on the phone, I was like, oh my goodness, what just happened? Like, how did that happen? And there were so many little things like that the Lord did along the way. I mean, we literally could, and maybe we should make a written account of signs and wonders. But I tell you what God has done is so much more than signs and wonders. What God is doing now literally makes all of those things like a shadow. But they are the things that God did to assure His leading and establish His placement, His word, and trust in Him along the way. And God will do that if you'll allow Him to, if you'll ask Him to do that. We went through many seasons in that, guys. The Lord undid me so fully. When we moved to the desert, I had nothing, literally. We sold our house, paid off the majority of our debt, and we had a little bit of money left. And then the money that we did have left got very quickly spent through some medical procedures, dental stuff, and broken vehicles, and moving costs. So everything that we had disappeared very quickly. We couldn't pay for our own food, we couldn't pay for our own housing, we couldn't pay for our own clothing, we couldn't do any of that. And God had used Rachel's parents for a season of time to help us through that. And God told them that. That's what they were supposed to do. And this is crazy. When I was looking at where to move in the desert before we even knew that Rachel's parents were going to move out there to be a help for us, I kept coming to this one road and couldn't figure it out because it was literally in the desert. There was nothing around it. I can't remember the name of the road right now. Remember, you guys remember the road that had all the wavies in it? Anyway, it was this interesting road that connected two parts of the desert to a southern part of the desert to Palm Springs. And I thought maybe that's where God wanted us to live. So I kept looking at houses and stuff there in this area. And I just kept thinking, oh my goodness, like it was in a wilderness. There was like nothing around. And if you guys haven't been to Southern California in the desert, you don't know what a wasteland looks like. It's a wasteland. There's nothing there but scorpions and rattlesnakes. It has a certain beauty, but I would not want to live there. Anyway, as it turns out, the place that I ended up finding a job was called the Father's Heart Ranch. And I literally went through a season of time where God was revealing his Father's heart to me. And I did not make that stuff up. Couldn't make it up. And you know where that Father's Heart Ranch was? It was on that road that I had been looking at before we ever moved. And I didn't even know anything about Father's Heart Ranch. There were so many things like that God did. When we moved from the desert, when we were supposed to move to the desert to Sacramento area, it came at a time when the leader of that organization called Father's Heart Ranch was wanting me to be built up to take up leadership in that organization, which I knew the Lord didn't want me to do, but this guy really wanted me to do, and he's a really lovely, godly, God-fearing man who had received a prophetic vision years before that 3 men were going to come and visit their place and that they were supposed to be a part of their ministry. And he told myself, John, and Emmanuel that, and that we were those men. So he didn't want me to leave. But when God spoke, the Lord has since gave them an opportunity there. Not because we're somebody. I still had so much to learn. So much to understand about God's will, God's ways, God's plan. God's wisdom activated through the process and work of discipleship in his house to raise up sons. That was just like the kindergarten version of learning sonship. And then again, the Lord gave us signs, wonders, and visions. We were outside, and I had a dream in my life, and I don't remember, I'd have to look up the timing of that dream, but it was crazy because it was before we even lived in this place in the desert. Initially, we lived in a place with Rachel's parents, and then the leader of this organization helped us get a home in a nicer part of the city, actually one of the most wealthy cities in the United States. We lived in Indian Wells. And we were living in a multi-million-dollar home that shared fence lines with a neighborhood in Indian Wells where Bill Gates and presidents and all those guys had homes. Crazy stuff. So we were living in a mansion, basically. Had a swimming pool in the backyard, had an extra home if you had a housekeeper, and then Rachel's parents ended up living there with us. Beautiful, beautiful place. And God had given me a dream that was actually disturbing me a little bit years before that, where a portion of this dream was where there was a competition. Am I going too late?
It's after 12.
Sorry. I'll try and finish up. Maybe there has to be a part 3. I don't know. But in this competition, we had to go from one place to another. I'm not going to detail the dream too much. But in this one specific part of the dream, every time I would try to get from this one place to another, I would have to go around this fenced area. It was like a barrier. I'd have to go around it. And I remember looking in the fence, and inside that fence, there was a family at a house with a pool in the backyard living their life. The Lord, again, was stirring something in, showing me this was before we lived there. I was offered that life, guys. I could have stayed there. But the Lord said in the dream, that's a barrier. It's keeping you from getting one place to another. And you're going to have to overcome this obstacle. Because it's obviously an obstacle in your life. Every time you're trying to be a part of this gets in the way. You have to go around it to figure that out. It was at that place that the Lord gave. We were out. All of us were out in the pool in the backyard one day. And we were swimming and whatever else. And we kind of got out and we were sitting on the patio, on the outside the pool, drying off in the hot desert sun. And I looked up in the sky and there was a cloud formation that looked exactly like an arrow. I mean, big, long cloud, two at the tip. It was an arrow. It was very clearly an arrow. And we were all like, oh my goodness, look at that. And immediately I thought, oh, the Lord's trying to show us something. So I grabbed my phone, I put the compass out, and I was like, okay, which way is the arrow pointing? Northwest. And I said, that's strange. And then we went into the house. And just before we entered the back door of the house, Noah said, I just had a vision. What? I mean, it was right after we saw this sign. And I said, well, what was the vision? And he said, I saw the hand of God come over us. It was over us. And then it moved in the direction of that arrow. And we followed it. And I knew then we wouldn't be there much longer. And then we moved to Sacramento. One of the first things that happened to us when we moved to Sacramento was another terrible situation. We were starting over in life again. Remember, at this place, I had a job now. I had a future at that job, and I had a place to live, and I had all those things, and that was all gone again. And when I got into Sacramento, we were at the place again. We had to live with somebody in their house. I couldn't provide for food, clothing, housing, anything for my family, for us. And I remember I applied. I had already worked a number of years, and so I had work experience and I had a lot of skills. I applied for 37 jobs over 6 months and couldn't get a single job. That was heartbreaking to me. It was frustrating to the people that were providing for me. I didn't know what to do. And the Lord told me then, right when we moved into this place, before I even went through all those not getting jobs, whatever, he said, I'm going to teach you that man does not live by bread alone. That was something that I heard very clearly from the Lord and in the Spirit. But see, I hadn't lived through it yet. And God did a lot of work in our lives during that time. And then we moved from there up here. And most of that was fulfilled. When we first moved out here, there was a lot of trouble again. We started over again. With many miracles, signs, and wonders, provisions, protections along the way. When we first moved out here, we didn't live at Whiskey Creek. We lived at a place over here off 14th Street and didn't know how to make ends meet. We were living on government help here. We had to go to the social services office downtown right there and ask for money and ask for food. We had to do that in California too. And the Lord continually said, I'll make a way. And I remember working at the dealership and thinking that it was the most dead-end place that I've ever been, and I didn't know how to make any money because I didn't really want to do that, and I was having a hard time there. And God continually provided. And you know what was really crazy with that job, as terrible as it seems, is for the first time in our life, we were in our marriage. We were able to buy our own kids' clothes, pay for our own housing, make a provision. We got off of government services and even save enough money to put an escrow payment down on Whiskey Creek Beach when the Lord brought that. I don't know how that happened. I still don't know how that happened because it sure doesn't seem like it happened because I was doing so well at my job. Now, this is not about earthly progress, success, placement, or anything. It's about moving, hearing, and obeying. Hearing and obeying. God is perfectly capable of doing what he wants to do, what he plans to do with and for your life. But you're going to need to let go of what you think your life is for or what you want it to be. Personal aspiration can very much get in front of and become a block or a hindrance to God's will. And then if God does, he doesn't always do that, but if God wants to press on you a little bit, then many times what he wants to press onto you doesn't seem like something you want to do or go through. So your soul gets really troubled with those things. I don't think you guys need to have some of the same turbulence and trouble that I had in life when God began to speak and move. If you will have a willing heart now and a trusting heart now. Something that I was really encouraged with by Hattie recently is her saying that she wants to entrust her future, the things that she doesn't know, and even the things that she hopes for, to the Lord. She doesn't want to have to burden that weight of concern. She wants to know what God wants. That's a really beautiful posture of heart. And you need to cultivate that, Hattie. You guys should initiate that in your own mind and heart. Some of you I know you hear our voice. I know you hear my voice and whoever speaks. But you process things through your own mind, through your own will, through your own desires. And just remember now that someone who loves you and cares for you said, it's not going to produce good things in your life. You'll find that out. I don't mean that as a judgment on your life at all. But it will happen. And I hope that at that moment you can recall the words of someone who looks over your life with care, concern, and love, and maybe turn to the Lord then. But you can also turn to the Lord now. You can ask God to speak to you now. You can ask God to begin to deal with you now. You can ask God to begin to reveal his heart to you now. He will do that if our request is sincere. If our posture before him is one of humility. You can at least ask God to humble you. I'll finish there. And maybe there'll be something in the future, maybe not. Anything stirred up in your heart or your mind that you want to ask, or something that impacted you that you want to share? Go. Let's take a minute, give you that opportunity to do that. There's no rush.
Well, I always think it's interesting to think about. I mean, we were pretty young, all of us, but just our perspective on what was going on at that point in life. We just had no idea what was going on. Because I mean, I don't think I ever remember any point in my life where I felt like we weren't okay. Like I just was.
That's the joy of childhood,
Yeah.
right there. Of innocence, and that's good though.
Yeah. But I don't know, it's just the perspective to look back and even like try to relive the mindset of how I was. It's just really interesting. I think it builds up a greater gratitude and trust for you and to the Lord, kind of like through what he's brought us through. I mean, that's just interesting to think about. So.
There are many miraculous things, for sure. But I don't focus on miracles so much. They don't make up the same substance that fellowship with the Father does. Fellowship with the Father, knowledge of his will, is more valuable than rubies and gold when it comes to the more difficult times of life. There's like that moment in the back room of my house where I literally felt like my life was over. But then the Lord's presence came in and he spoke, and it was like everything was okay, even though everything wasn't okay. God knew God was good, and God has done that on many occasions in my life. And again, that doesn't have to be an experience unique to me. That is an experience that is meant to be unique to the sons of God. Anyone else?
I would think of, just how amazing what the Lord led you through is, and how even now looking at this moment that we're in right now, if you were able to see through that journey and even know, like, just think of every single person here had a testimony that brought them here right to this moment. And it really just puts into perspective how amazing the Lord is. Because it's just like, we just all come from everywhere. We all had our own, personal testimony, but yet we're all here right now for a perfectly ordained reason.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And there is so much more ahead, you guys. So much more ahead. I know that our world is in a dark place, but the future that God has for his people is glorious, I assure you. And it will be through the dark times. So don't think that's not going to be the case. But know that what God is going to do, how he's going to do it, it's going to be many times like those hard moments where you may not know how to even take the next breath. But God will come and say, I'm here. And it's going to make it all the difference. But only if you know him. If you don't know the Lord, then how can he relate to you that way? That's an invitation on your part. Anyone else?
I just admire the desire that the Lord has given you in your life. Just, with all the things that he's spoken to you, and even things that you didn't understand, like you brought, you never, there was, I think, I don't know how to explain it, but like a God-given pull towards his way. Like there was just something within you that couldn't resist it. Like,
Yeah. There's a lot of similarity there to the call of Abraham. I'm gonna send you to a place you don't know. And I'm not claiming to be Abraham or like Abraham in many ways, but there is a Godward draw that just, I pray that you guys will have that kind of passion and desire for the Lord. That when the Lord speaks to you, it touches your life, your heart in such a way that you can't get away, even if you try. Lord, I bless these young people with that passion, Lord, that you would ignite it in their heart. Lord, that whoever so desires, when they draw near to you, Lord, that you would draw near to them. Lord, when they call upon your name, that you would answer. When they would know your presence, that you would surround them with your loving arms and draw them to yourself. Lord, that each one here might know what true fellowship and intimacy is with you. And then we can share that fellowship and joy and love and intimacy with one another in your name. Amen.
Thank you.
Indeed. All right. The Master of Ceremonies has her say.
We'll be back here at 1-ish, and be sure that you eat, but also get some fresh air
Yep.
before that time.
It's warming up. Might have to